Hi, it's Dia. Today I'm going to use this picture. It's one of the obviously uncolored images from my newest coloring book that I just released on Amazon and in my Etsy store, Art by Dia, called the BUNS. And today I'm going to do bokeh. Now there's this little area over in the top left of this picture called After the Rain. And I left it unfinished on purpose because I figured people could put trees there or a sky or do whatever they wanted, because most of the images in this book have a lot going on. So to start with the bokeh, I took lemon yellow and I made indications of circles in the background. And then I used goldenrod because I wanted the image to appear like it's in the dark, and then there's fireflies. There's a little firefly in this image, and I thought it would be neat to add brighter areas to indicate that there's fireflies all over the place. So that color that you're looking at now is sunburst yellow, and all I was doing was trying to define the areas that were going to contain the brighter parts of the reflections or the lights. Now, looking back after having done this whole thing, I would have just gone over that whole area lightly in that lemon yellow and possibly the canary yellow. Because what I ended up learning after doing this whole thing is that the whole area almost has a glowy effect, even through some of the black areas. There's a lot of blurriness, and I can't say I wasted a lot of time because I definitely learned how to do this better, but you don't have to go through this whole thing. You know what? I'm even going to stop myself. You might have to go through this whole thing. I'm saying this, but I didn't do it the other way yet. So I'm just going to leave that statement, but with a little question mark. Now this is chocolate. Oh, and by the way, these are all Prismacolor pencils, and I'm using Prismacolor because there's going to be a lovely giveaway from Prismacolor in April. It's a very big set. Let me take a look to see how many pencils are actually in the set that I'm giving away. Ooh, it's 150. I think that's the biggest set that Prismacolor has. So what I'm doing with the chocolate now is going around the areas that I defined as the light parts, or the actual reflections in the bokeh. Now, I was being very, very careful here, and I was trying to make the lines around the perimeter of those lighter areas very, very neat and very defined. And you don't really have to, because most of the bokeh that you see in an image are blurred in the background. It almost looks like a little bit of a pulse of light coming through the dark. Yes, it took me a long time, and I am going to leave this whole thing so you can see what I did. But I ended up making the edges of all of those light images very diffused, except for one or two. And what I also learned is that the more diffused and fuzzy the light looks, meaning, let's say I drew one of them, meaning one of the circles, and then I kind of went over it and over it with a bit of brown and a bit of very sharp black. The darker and more fuzzy the image, the farther in the background it looks. The more clear and defined the edges, the closer it looks. Because let's say there's a row of Christmas lights, and some of it's closer to you and some of it goes farther into the distance. The ones that are farther away, the blur will look a little bit bigger and more diffused and a little bit darker. The ones that are closer look brighter and sharper. So as I was filling in those areas with chocolate, I realized that the areas around the perimeter looked even darker or needed to look darker. So I took the pure black and I started to go in there with that jet black, and the area automatically looked more realistic. Actually, when I first started to do it, what I thought was black was indigo blue. So then I found the black and went back over. Now I made the rest of this little area a little bit quicker because what I was doing is filling in the perimeter with black chocolate, and then I was also going over the light areas in sunburst yellow, Spanish orange, canary yellow, lemon yellow, jasmine, which is funny because jasmine in this set is a wheat kind of yellow, and I always thought of jasmine as like a purple, but, and then I also used cream and goldenrod. I had never done bokeh in an area that I wanted to actually look like it was midnight with lights coming through. I had done like maybe little diffused areas in the background of a picture that looked more like daylight. But this I actually wanted to look like nighttime. So it was a process for me. There's that cream color, which actually came in handy quite a bit because I went over a lot of the other colors that looked a little bright like goldenrod, and I blended them in. And right about here, I started to realize it looked much better if I was using the yellows into the background. Because after looking at a lot of pictures of bokeh, and I highly recommend that, look that up. Go on Google and look at many different images. So the ones that I picked were golden bokeh at night or bokeh in photographs, and that helped a lot because it let me know that it wasn't just circles on a black background. Oh, the other thing about bokeh is that when the bokeh overlap one another, the area that overlaps is lighter because there's two lights on top of one another. Now, I wasn't really able to achieve that here. The one in the top left corner, it was a little bit late because I had already started coloring. And then once I realized that, I realized, bingo, next time that's what I have to realize, and I have to leave that area lighter to make it look more realistic. But you know what? It's all an experiment, and you'll learn something new from every single thing you do, especially in this art thing. There's so much, it's never ending. So now I'm going over pretty much everything with the cream because I kind of realized I should have done that to begin with. Like I said in the beginning, just go over everything with a light yellow or even a goldenrod or a canary yellow, depending on what you want the bokeh to look like. I was pushing pretty hard with that cream color. Oop, now you can hear me sharpening. Sorry about that. And there was a little bit of dust because I did push hard because I was trying to get a certain look. And then I also realized Prismacolors are super creamy. And they form, just like everybody says, kind of a coating on the paper. And I'm sure that any pencils that you use would do that, but these were the most creamy of any that I have used. I also realized that I shouldn't have printed this or cut this so it was all the way to the edge, because the image in the book has a frame around it, and it would be much easier to do this, especially with an image like this where you have to have such dark and intense pigment around the perimeter. You can see a little bit that the paper's starting to curl a bit, and it was hard to manage at the edges. I also thought this was a good spot to do this bokeh because there was leaves in front of it, or there was some kind of an image in front of it, so you could see the difference between the uncolored and the colored version. And about here also, it started to look like bokeh. It started to look like that illuminated area in the background. Far from perfect, but I wanted to leave those areas uncolored. But then also somewhere along the line in this image, I decided to color them so you could see how it looked like a background and how the leaves looked like they were more in the foreground. I also realized I really love the black in the Prismacolor set. And I love this picture. Well, I started to like this picture more as I added the black. I also decided that it's pretty hard to color bokeh with colored pencils. So I'm going to do a little series this week of bokeh. I'm going to do it, obviously, in this one. I have another one that I did that I will link below in purples and like misty shades. And then I'm going to use Conti pastels and see how it works with them, because I know from my past experience using the Conti colors, using the Conti pastels for any kind of coloring, it goes so much faster than colored pencils. I think colored pencils is a very challenging medium, and I do a lot of my tutorials with colored pencils because it seems like that's a favorite. But if you have another favorite, please tell me, send me a message below if you like using Conti pencils, Conti pastels, or any other kind of pastels. I would love to know what you're using, because as a coloring book designer, I design what I like and what I think people might like also, but I have no idea, and I had no idea before I started this, that there was a certain way that people were coloring and prefer to color. So if you have any ideas or any input, please let me know. I would love to know. So now here I'm adding that cream again, and I'm blending the edges. Now you have to watch, you see what I just did? I went over a dark area, and then I was blending toward the lighter area, and some of the dark got in, which is fine. You can get that off easy enough, but I just want you to be aware that that happens. Sorry about the noise in the background. That's my lawn getting done. So around this part, I was shaping the areas more, and I realized that the brown, I chose the brown because yes, there's it's sort of an illusion that the very background behind the bokeh is black, but the brown is kind of an area where, or I should say the brown is a color that sort of the black fades into around the bokeh. So it's almost like a lighter version. In different images, it might be different. The black might fade into green or blue, but I figured this is sort of a woodland image, and those fireflies that in my head are actually what are causing the bokeh to be there, probably would be brownish. I thought gray would be too cool, so it kind of went from yellow to darker yellow to an orangey color into the brown and then into the black. So as it faded, there was a progression from very light to very, very dark. Now you can see here also that the bokeh aren't perfectly round and they're still a little all over the place, but this was an interesting study for me too. I wasn't quite sure of how to do all of it, so you're watching me experiment here. I pulled up a reference photo here because as I was looking at this, I didn't like the way it looked. And I was wondering why. And then I realized that the bokeh looked very similar. They all looked the same, even though I did some of them darker and some of them lighter. They all kind of looked like the same brightness. So I was trying here to go over certain circles to make them look like they were more in the background and to make them look like they were warmer. And I didn't quite know how this was going to come out. And you can see it's a little rough right now. But as soon as I started doing this, I realized that I really liked the way it looked and it made it look more defined. And the ones that were lighter were more in the foreground, or seemed to be more in the foreground. So I'm going to speed the rest up because that's what I'll be doing for the next few minutes. So you can see that I made the background a little bit darker because once there was a difference in the different kind of bokeh, I felt like the background could be darker and it didn't look so imbalanced. So once again, I'm discovering new things here. Now here I decided to color the leaves in front of the bokeh area, or the bokeh filled area. I'm not quite sure how to use that in a sentence. That color is moss green. And what I did first was cover the leaves in lime peel and chartreuse. And going down the center of the leaves, I used yellow chartreuse and then went around the lighter areas with the moss green. And I also used the moss green at the edges of the flowers and for the veins, in the leaves. And then I also used it for the veins in the leaves also. I'll leave this in real time in case you want to see what I'm doing. So there's an indication of the veins on the picture. and I just made one line and then the lines coming off of it like a regular leaf. Now what I did was take the, sorry, I'm looking for the colors. I took the yellow chartreuse and I went over the vein. Now I used, how do I explain this? I left the line that was already there, meaning on the coloring page, and then I left the other side open. So there's a vein and the line that was already there is on, like, let's say the right or the left. And then I took the moss green and went around the thin, lighter green, yellow chartreuse line. So that way, that vein would be defined and it looked like it stood up. And then I very carefully went a bit lighter as I went toward the outer part of the leaf. Now, that color was apple green. And then I used chartreuse and lime peel. And you can see where the veins are there. And I left the veins lighter because I wanted it to look a little bit dimensional. And I also added chestnut, which, if you're used to polychromos pencils, it's very close to that color Caput Mortuum. So it's a reddish burgundy brown, and it's beautiful and it's perfect for plants. You can see that I'm using it here to define certain areas and make the veins stand out a bit. It's also a good indicator for if the plant is maybe a little bit older. You know, when plants are very young, there's spring green and there's almost like an alien green because it's a sprout, it's brand new. Then when it gets older, the leaves get a little darker, they get to be true green, they get to be more apple green, and then they get to be forest green and even a teal. And then when they start to fade a bit or they start to get older, you can start to use the chestnut colors and even the oranges right before they actually turn to that fall color. Now I'm adding, on top of what I just did, some more veins with the moss green, and I had a pretty sharp point here. And I did basically the same on this other series of leaves. That's the chartreuse, and you can see that I had already put the light chartreuse vein in. And when I do this, I am going faster than I normally would. So it's never perfect for these videos. I would like it to be, and there are so many of you out there that are such amazing colorists, and you're so much better at it than I am. I would love to see any of your work. And I'm astounded every day when I see images that I drew that you colored in, and they're gorgeous. So please feel free to, you know, take it in any direction you want. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. I'm just trying to show you what I did for this specific picture and to give you some tips that I might have, that I have experience with. And if you want to take them and run, that's awesome. Now here's a little bit of apple green. I like it when the leaves, just like in nature, have all different colors on them, because nothing's ever, well, hardly anything is ever one color. So don't be afraid to take all the greens out of the pack and color a little bit here, and then pick up another one and color a little bit there, which is what you see me doing most of the time. You can see that I left a little area there because that's the vein in the leaf, and I wanted to highlight that. Well, I don't know if highlight's the word, but I wanted to leave that so you could actually notice that it's there. This is still moss green. And the two bigger leaves in this section are more forward. They're more in the foreground, so I colored a little bit darker underneath them on those bottom leaves to indicate a shadow. I didn't really specifically use a dark color because that area is going to be pretty dark to begin with. Meaning that whole area, including the bokeh, even though there's a glittery, like shiny feel to it, the light would be coming from the back. So if this is a nighttime scene, those leaves wouldn't be shiny and reflecting the sun, but they might be reflecting like a little bit of glow here and there, possibly from the fireflies that are flying around them. And if you have another set, go for it. You don't have to pick the exact same colors. And you don't even have to follow the exact lines that I'm putting in there. You can leave them out. You can add more. That is yellow chartreuse, the same color as the veins, but I wanted to add a little bit of light over there because I knew I was going to go over it with the moss green again, but I wanted it to be a little bit different than the moss green on the other side. So that's where layers come in handy. There's the chestnut again in that shadowy area. And none of the areas have to be perfect. If you look at a leaf that's changing a bit, those colors don't follow any specific pattern, and you can make that up, and you can do it the way you see it. Sometimes when I do a coloring demo, I think ahead of time what colors I might be using and how the whole process is going to go. And with this one, I didn't do that. So you kind of got a view of how I would normally color and draw something. So anyway, the reason I'm telling you this is that it might be a little harder to follow, but I wanted to leave it anyway because I think that even though it might be a little hard to follow, and you might even have to look at it a couple of times, you might get some ideas. So I decided I would leave it, even though it's a little bit more all over the place. But that's kind of how I work. So I like it. I like it, and I like the way things come out when I just kind of wing it. And so I don't know. Maybe I'm trying to say it wouldn't be bad if you would just wing it too sometimes, and just see what happens. So I decided to go over the vein area with lemon yellow because I thought that area might be standing up in each of the leaves, and it might pick up some reflection from the bokeh. And I'm glad I did it. It made the leaves a little more punchy. So now that the leaves were done in that area anyway, I started to see that the bokeh area was a little bit blotchy, so I took a darker brown. Actually, it's 90% French gray, which is a dark brownish gray. And I went over many of the areas that I had already done. And it added a nice depth. And it also made everything look a little bit smoother. I'm going to speed this up now too because it's basically me going over areas that I had already colored. Now I'm taking lemon yellow and I'm doing some blending. It looked a little blotchy to me. And I started to realize also that it's hard to make a smooth area with dark colors unless you truly go in and burnish it. So this is a bit of a challenge because you really can't burnish because you want the glowy effect in the background. So I'm taking that 90% French gray again. And I decided that that one bokeh was a little bit too much there, so I put it in the background. And that basically meant to go over it very carefully and make it darker so it now fades into the background. So about here I started to panic. I not really panic. Like I started to think, maybe this video is not going to work out after all this work, because I really didn't like the way it was all coming out. And of course I decided to keep going. And I've said this a million times, if you don't like it, just keep on going. So I went back in with the gray, and I made this faster again because it's a whole lot of going over what I already did. So I decided that one to the left of what I was just drawing was going to be in the foreground. And I took an eraser and started to make some areas that I thought would be lighter and brighter. And I started to define some areas. More chocolate. And at this point, some of them still looked too much like all of the other ones. For the rest of the video, I was going back and forth with the colors that I had already mentioned. That was that chestnut again. I fussed with the leaves a little bit more to make them stand out in the foreground. And then I realized that I would sharpen the black, and what it really needed was more definition. So I spent a little bit of time and I made tiny, tiny little circles, and I formed the background of the bokeh as much as I possibly could. I screwed up a little bit there and erased because it was a little bit too dark. So looking back over this whole thing, I probably could have just made areas in the background with yellow, any kind of yellow. The canary, the lemon, the Spanish orange, sunburst yellow, and then very lightly go over the area that you want in the background, because then you would still see some of that yellow through it, and it wouldn't have taken all this time. So my next video is going to be Bokeh done with Conti pastel pencils. And I'm going to see if that cuts down time and actually what that will look like compared to colored pencils. That one right there, the one that I just touched, that one is coming out great. It's very light in the center, and then it gets a little bit darker, 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 and then fades. So I'm going to have to use that one as my own example in the future. So to be fair, after this was done, I took a look at it, and I wasn't crazy about it. So I added some more black, and all I did was go over the areas that already existed and then blended it in with some cream and some yellow. And then eventually I ended up with this. And you can see that I went over a couple of them with a Signo white gel pen, and I made some little tiny dots throughout the area too. So all in all, I really like the way it came out. And thank you once again for joining me. Like I said, I'll be doing another one of Bokeh, another video of Bokeh this week. And subscribe to me, hit the bell button, because I'm going to be doing a wonderful Prismacolor giveaway. And that's about it for now. So thank you so much. Thank you for watching this crazy Bokeh adventure that I had today. And I hope you check out my new book, The Buns, on Amazon and in my Etsy shop. So once again, thank you. I'll see you later. Bye.